Hi everyone, it's Natalie. um, I want to talk about anger. I think it's a subject that is one that most of us are really going to be likely to have strong feelings about, and I think for really good reasons. Um, I was pretty upfront sharing the difficulty of some of the experiences that I've had recently that have left me having a lot more anger than usual, just to try and cope with. And I've noticed that there's a lot of difficult emotions coming up in the tarot community online right now. And I think for all the discussion that can be had about the virtues of love and light and staying positive and so forth, my experience has been that no amount of that is really gonna help in the long run. Frankly, it can have the effect of leaving me feeling worse, and leaving me feeling even like more guilty or angry or ashamed, um, than I might be if I were just addressing the physical reality, the embodied reality. Sorry, I'm shaking the camera because I'm resting my elbow, but like the physical reality of just being in a body and having a really horrible emotion come up that you can't really control, and that feels like it is controlling you. Um, and I started like filming a couple of different videos about this, and honestly, I felt like they were patronizing, and so I haven't put them up. Um, and I kept thinking, like, why does that tone, why am I reacting to that tone, as though it's that I was using, as though it's patronizing. And I realized, okay, it's probably because if I were really someone in the throes of anger and of just all of its accompanying, possible emotions, which include things like shame, guilt, fear. Um, there can be a whole host of other emotions that come along with anger that are, really not actually anything to do with anger. They're their own things. Guilt is its own thing. Shame is its own thing. Fear is its own thing. Grief is its own thing. Um, and very frequently they come. They will show up at your doorstep with anger, as their messenger, as their page, the page of anger. I wonder which one that would be. I don't know if it would be swords or maybe wands. I don't know, but it's that's usually what how we start to realize that there's something else under the surface, right? Is that it shows up initially anyway as frustration or anger, and there's something else beneath it that is begging for our attention. Um, and if I were someone in that place, I think if I saw somebody feeling really compassionate and peaceful and happy and who seemed like they've, or was even just talking from a place of like, oh, I have the answers to this and it's all sorted out, honestly, my bullshit meter starts to go off. And so even though I was coming from that place on some level, as I started to record it, I just thought, that's just not enough. It's just not enough. Because the truth of the matter is, yeah, I might feel good in one moment, but the reality of living is that you get through it once, and then you get through it again, and then you get through it again and again and again and again. Um, it's a process. It's not like, I don't think, if I think if anybody ever says that they've got it all figured out, or that they know for sure, um, what to do with anger, well, they may feel that way. They may really genuinely feel that way, and that may be their experience at that moment. Certainly, I have been in that place a time or two, And I can also tell you that it was temporary. And it may have been temporary for a week or a month. Um, I think at one point it was temporary enough, even for maybe 5 or 6 months, probably while I was in, although realistically not. My memory's probably not very good about that. I don't always remember negative moments, especially if they're short. Suffice it to say, you can easily dupe yourself if you're very spiritual or you're embedded in a spiritual practice, into believing that maybe you've overcome something. And the truth of the matter is, if you really believe that, at least in my personal experience has been, life is gonna life is gonna shovel something your direction that will test that idea on a very deep and profound level that will shake your ability to manage it properly. So it'll send you back into, a place of having to cope with it and deal with it, with more care and more concern than maybe you ever wanted to have to apply to it, if that makes sense. Um, so I thought, as I start to approach this, I really need to come from that place, of just being really human, really open, really direct, and honest about, in the same way that I was at that moment when it was coming up. It was like, okay, I need to be honest about what my own journey has been with it, and what the reality is. I should also tell you, 10 years ago, I had a real anger problem. Real. Like it was really bad. I was not good at dealing with anger. I judged myself terribly for being for having anger. Um, and I was convinced at that time in my life that being an angry person was a thing. That it's possible to be, that maybe I'm not just me, maybe that, being someone who gets angry or has anger or experiences anger, um, means that I'm an angry bitch. And that is the honest to God truth. I really interpreted it that way. That must mean that there's a judgment involved, that I'm an angry bitch. And the truth of the matter is that that's not the case. If anything, I've learned that anger is a physical experience, and emotions really genuinely like live in our bodies. So I think really the first key for me to understanding my own anger and being able to be with it was recognizing that simple fact, that if I'm experiencing anger, that emotion is moving through me and through my body, but it doesn't mean that that's who I am, right? Like, I'm not my anger. Anger is something that's coming up in response to something that's happening inside of me, or something that's happening, something that I'm reacting to in my outer world. So a big part of learning to be with anger was to learn to understand what are the things that I might be responding to. And that meant understanding more about myself and about what it is that, what kind of unresolved pain, fears, guilt, shames, emotions, are under the surface that I had not dealt with, because I spent a large part of my teens and really 20s learning how to squelch that. And maybe, I don't know that I would say it's any worse than what anyone else would experience, just different. But I trained as an actor twice. I trained once in undergrad and again in graduate school. And both times, involved being regularly, and even as a working actor, involved being constantly triggered by the world, by the way that everyone is, right? By interpersonal things, unresolved trauma that's in your system, that's living in the dark, that's not conscious, and then having all of that stuff triggered by the relationships socially with the other actors in my class or in my show that I was in, the power dynamics between myself and the director, comparison with other people, and that's before you ever get to the material. And often the material that I was asked to work with was really heavy shit. It was, I played a lot of bad characters, a lot of, the bad character in the play, the person that was more unlovable or, difficult, drug addicted. I didn't get the ingenue roles. I ended up, because I didn't, something in me didn't, despite, when I was younger, I was a very attractive young person, and I did not remotely have an ingenue kind of energy. I really didn't. I just had a very character, what they call character, or, a lot of gravitas or weight. Even if my body at that time didn't have a lot of physical weight, I'm still really tall and broad and big boned. So I did not, when on stage with a tiny person, it just didn't read. So, and a lot of actors are small people, physically small people. So it was just there was a lot of rejection. There was a lot of triggering, a lot of, all of that. And then, being in that environment also meant you can't express any kind of dissatisfaction, because that then could mark you as a difficult actor. So there's the societal thing of don't be, an angry bitch. And then I had a career thing of don't be a difficult actor, right? So you can't have it. In other words, don't have any personal boundaries. So when I went to try and address my anger, and how much, rage would come up, or how disproportionately, I'm trying to remember how it would all feel, but like I remember being like disproportionately upset, distressed, emotional over, like things that wouldn't necessarily be that way, right? Things that seem kind of comparatively small. So, tripping over something and falling would have been enough of a trigger for all of the unresolved, shame, anger, guilt, unworthiness, fear of being unlovable, all of that to come to the surface in order to validate itself, essentially, and remind me of all the ways in which I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. I made a terrible mistake, and I had no skills for managing that. So it could knock me into a terrible mood for days, actually, even. It was awful. It was just awful. It's terrible. I don't experience that anymore. Not like I used to. I still experience a lot of heavy shit, but it doesn't feel like, it doesn't have that kind of weight. It doesn't have that ability to control what I do now, right? And it's hard to remember because it's been a while since I've experienced it on that level. But it's amazing, isn't it? How if you're, something happens, and instead of being able to respond to it very gently, right, or with, if every reaction, or action has an equal and opposite reaction, why is it that the response that comes up seems like it's 10,000 times bigger than what actually happened? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So one mistake, in other words, could send me, or one bad date, right? One, I name it, right? Name the difficulty, could throw me into a place of thinking like, okay, well, that means that's evidence that I'm bad, or that there's something wrong with me. and it's a problem, right? I'm a problem. It's not just that it's a problem. I'm a problem, and I'm bad. That's not true. That's not true. But I had to learn why that's not true and how that's not true, and I had to develop skills to manage. And that's not easy work, but I will tell you hands down, it is some of the best work I've ever done in my life, and I really recommend it. Um, and in total transparency, and I'm pretty honest about this. It's on, if you go to my YouTube page, like there's a picture of one of the Buddhas that I have by my house. I'm a Buddhist. That's just how I am. Um, and really, I don't want to suffer, and I don't want other people to suffer. And I can't tell you how much that is a profound motivating factor in my life. Um, and when it's not that other people's suffering hurts me that badly, it's just that I can't help but resonate with it and then want to find a way to help. And I know I can't fix, and I know and that it's not even my job to fix. None of us can do anything beyond address our own stuff, right? I can't fix the world any more than anyone else can. And it's our job to then recognize what is it then that's in the world that I find triggering, that I find upsetting, that sends me into a reactive state, in order that I can take care of it. Because none of us can help the world, none of us can do good in the world for anyone if we're not able to be with our own suffering. And that's really the truth, is just to learn how to be with what your own suffering is. And I have, let me see if I can find it. I have I have my little devil card here on the top, because I'd started to make a video the other night about the relationship of the, especially this devil card, to all of it, right? If we, these are very ashamed looking people. It's kind of like this, right? With the love and light stuff. Positive psychology is great, but it's not helpful if it means that we're using the positive psychology or the love and light to push away the shame, the guilt, the fear, the anger, the grief, the trauma, or fill in the blank, whatever difficult emotion it is that we're struggling with. I think it was Tom Benjamin was talking about this on a video of his that wasn't even a recent video. It was kind of an older one that I'd pulled up to listen to. And he was talking about, the Jekyll and Hyde relationship to the devil card, right? And he was looking at a spread that had the devil card in the middle and, a sun card on one side and a moon card on the other, right? And he was saying very specifically with relationship to that, if you put, so much energy into pushing away the darkness and the difficulty inside your physical experience, eventually what's going to happen is that it's going to come back up in the form, of enslavement, right? It's going to continue to get bigger and bigger. It's going to come up and behind you like a big monster that you don't want to look at, that you don't want to deal with. I mean, that was my experience of it for sure. And yet when I turned around to look at it and face it, I didn't find a devil. I didn't find anything that looked as scary as, actually, that's not even a very scary devil. I think that's probably why I chose it for the video I chose not to use. But it's not even as scary as that. It wasn't even very big. It's kind of more like a small child that's really upset, about something. So when I look at dealing with my emotions, when I look at dealing with something like, specifically something like anger, I've got several books here that I definitely want to recommend. But the first one is called The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. This woman's brilliant. She personally talks a lot in here about her own trauma, her own problems, issues. She's dealt with bipolar disorder for a very long time in her life and learned to manage it like a champion. I mean, she's a pretty. I feel like she's a pretty enlightened, pretty enlightened individual, and I think she said recently somewhere that and this book is about emotions, but it also takes a really spiritual, energetic perspective to the whole thing. In addition to that, and that makes it very appealing, I think, for spiritual types. But interestingly, I think it's so comprehensive that it's some like counseling and psychology programs started using it as a reference. But in here, she's chapter 12 is her chapter about anger. And if you want, you can pause that and read this. And I will also just kind of read some of the highlights of it. She says that anger is essentially about protection and restoration, and that's at its roots. I found that to be true. I will say, and it includes, she says here, rage, fury, and the healing of trauma. So the gifts of anger are honor, conviction, proper boundaries, protection of yourself and others, and healthy detachment. The questions that you want to ask yourself when you are experiencing anger, she says here, what must be protected? What must be restored? Okay, signs of obstruction of anger. They can be repressive, so that would include enmeshment, self-abandonment, apathy, depression, and boundary loss. If you're expressing anger in a way that's unhelpful, cycling rages that create harsh boundaries, hatred and prejudice, and isolation. She says, channel the fiery intensity of anger into your boundary instead of repressing it or exploding with it. Then speak your truth or make your correcting actions. This will reset your boundaries in healthy ways, which will protect you in your relationships. So, she goes into great detail. I love this. I even bookmarked it. She's got a thing in here about why we are not all one. Okay, so she gives a lot of credence to boundaries and individuation, and why that doesn't work. She talks about what the message is in anger. And she says, when you channel your anger properly, it will restore your boundary and your sense of honor, right? But when you go on a rampage, you dishonor every soul you encounter, including your own. And it's why we feel so shit when we blow up at someone, right? I really recommend this book. She talks deeply, she talks about practicing it, honoring it in other people, what to do if it gets stuck. It's amazing. She talks about apathy and boredom. She talks about, which is a mask for anger. She talks about depression. She talks about suicidal feelings, confusion, fear, hatred, guilt and shame, jealousy and envy, panic and terror, sadness, grief, depression, suicidal urges, joy, stress and resistance. It's I can't. This is these 3 books I'm about to recommend here. They're all books that I've had multiple copies of, because when I was still teaching university students, who were majority of whom were actors or directors, I gave away so many copies of these books. So this was one that I had that's fairly recent. I think my original copy I gave to a directing student, actually. And the second one, I've given this one as gifts to a lot of people as well. I recommend this one because it depersonalizes everything. It's The Buddha's Brain. Um, it's a beautiful book. And really specifically, it tells you why, right? Why we feel the way we feel, what's being activated in the brain, and what we can do to calm it, right? What we can do to take ownership of it. So I'll be referring to this one a fair bit, Buddha's Brain. And then finally, and this is a copy, this is an older copy. I think I dug this one out. It came from Borders. You know, it's a few years old. And amazingly, it's not one that I gave away. I've given this one away a lot. But The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. Really good book, really helpful. And it's taken from a more psychological perspective than a Buddhist perspective. And that's why I'm also going to recommend this one. I can also bring more Buddhist themed books in as well if people are interested in those. And I'll probably talk about those specifically a different time. But that's where I want to start. This video is a lot longer than what I intended, but I felt like in order to introduce anger and talk about it, I really needed to just be really honest and forthright about my own experiences with it, and come to you from that place first. So, yeah, more than anything, I just hope that what I have to offer is something that's helpful and useful, and that, yeah, that it could be of use to people. I don't know what else to say. So it probably means I should just stop there. All right. Thanks, everybody. And I really sincerely wish everyone who's watching tremendous strength and peace and ease in whatever it is that you're experiencing. And we'll talk again. All right. Bye.